So who is the most important person in your life? I mean, I want you to genuinely just think about your answer to that for a second.
Right. It's a harder question than it seems.
Yeah, exactly. Got it. Because if your brain just instantly went to, your spouse, your kids, or maybe your parents, well, the biology of human survival says you actually answered incorrectly. The answer needs to be you.
Which is just a really tough pill to swallow, isn't it? I mean, it runs completely counter to how almost everyone listening has been socially conditioned.
Oh, 100%.
We're taught that self-sacrifice is like the ultimate metric of being a good person.
Exactly. But digging through the stack of research we are unpacking for today's deep dive, that fundamental misunderstanding of who needs to come first is actually causing a massive biological crisis.
Right.
So today, our mission is to debate the true impact of life stresses, specifically what the sources call the triple threat of money, relationships, and sudden changes in our circumstances.
It's fascinating stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we're going to figure out exactly why, instead of actually resolving these pressures, we get stuck in this toxic, repeating biological cycle called the life loop.
And to really grasp this, it requires a complete paradigm shift in how we view ourselves. Because if you look at the core thesis emerging across all these documents we're analyzing, it is both radical and, honestly, incredibly validating.
Right, because it reframes the whole conversation around what we call mental health.
Yes. Mental health, as we commonly discuss it in mainstream culture today, isn't actually an illness.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it is a reactive state to life stress. So what modern society often labels as a disorder or, a pathology is in reality just your biological operating system doing exactly what it was designed to do over millions of years of evolution.
Which is to survive.
Exactly, to survive.
So it's not a glitch. The system isn't broken.
Precisely. Your body and your brain are functioning perfectly to keep you alive under immense pressure. The actual problem is that, well, nobody ever handed you the instruction manual for this operating system.
Oh, absolutely not.
We were never taught how to operate it, or how to regulate it, or even how to process the alarms it sends us. And because we don't know how to turn off those alarms, we just end up in a state of severe biochemical depletion.
Wow. Okay, so if the system is just trying to protect us, we have to understand what it actually thinks it's protecting us from, right?
Right.
And looking at the data here, it seems we are being crushed by three specific pillars of stress. Let's start with the first one, which is arguably the most universal, and that's financial stress.
Oh, yeah.
Why does a lack of money cause such a, catastrophic physical reaction in the body?
Because of an evolutionary mismatch. To your conscious mind, financial insecurity is a modern abstract problem, right? You're looking at a bank screen or maybe a mortgage statement.
Yeah, it's just numbers.
Exactly. But your primitive brain doesn't understand abstract concepts like debt or inflation. It only understands survival.
So it reacts like it's a physical danger.
Exactly. It processes financial insecurity as a literal physical threat to your life.
Right.
It triggers the exact same biological alarm as if a predator were standing right in front of you.
Which means your body just floods with cortisol, right, the stress hormone.
Yes, massive, massive spikes of cortisol and adrenaline. But the issue here is that a predator eventually leaves or you escape.
Right.
But a mortgage bill doesn't just go away. The threat is constant. So you are locked in this sustained, unrelenting state of fight or flight.
Oh, wow.
And that sustained cortisol spike leads to chronic insomnia, hypertension, and a nervous system that is just perpetually redlining. You're physiologically preparing for a physical battle that never actually happens.
So if your body is flooded with cortisol because you're worried about making rent, what happens when you try to interact with another human being? I mean, that chronic tension has to bleed into the way we treat people.
It absolutely does, and it warps our connections completely. Which brings us to the second massive stressor, relationships. But not just any relationship. The foundation of every single interaction you have is built entirely on your relationship with yourself.
Right, how you view your own worth.
Exactly, how you manage your emotions, how you literally inhabit your own body. When that internal foundation is cracked, usually by some core belief that you are somehow inadequate or unsafe, every other relationship you have carries that exact same structural flaw.
The research highlights a really insidious way this shows up in our behavior, actually. Something called sawing, like compulsive people-pleasing.
Yes, fun.
Where we shrink ourselves, we suppress our own boundaries to avoid conflict or rejection. And the crazy part is, society actively rewards us for this.
They absolutely do.
We get called easygoing or flexible or a team player. But biologically speaking, the sources make it sound like this is actually a form of relational self-harm.
I mean, it is a profound form of self-harm, honestly, because
Right.
authentic human connection biologically requires vulnerability. But if you are constantly fawning, you are constantly suppressing your true self just to manage someone else's emotional state. And by doing that, you're literally starving your brain of oxytocin.
Oxytocin being the bonding chemical, right?
Exactly. It's the hormone that makes us feel safe, loved, connected. When you fawn, you might be successfully surviving a relationship by, say, avoiding an argument.
Keeping the peace, yeah.
Right, keeping the peace. But you aren't actually in the relationship. Your brain registers that lack of authentic connection. Your oxytocin drops and your sense of isolation skyrockets even if you're surrounded by people.
That is incredibly heavy. So we have chronic financial stress pumping us full of cortisol and fractured relationships starving us of oxytocin.
Yeah.
But these things don't operate in a vacuum. It seems like the real danger is when these external pressures start shifting all at once.
That's the compounding effect of the third stressor, of
Yes.
change in circumstances. Human beings are incredibly adaptable creatures, right?
Yeah.
We can handle one major change relatively well. Say you get a new job, you adapt. But if you get a new job and you're forced to move to a new city and suddenly you get a scary medical diagnosis and maybe your child is struggling in a new school.
It's just too much.
Exactly. That is an accumulation of change that simply overwhelms the human operating system.
Well, to visualize this, I was thinking about your smartphone. Like, imagine a phone running 50 really heavy apps in the background,
Oh, that's a good analogy.
right? You've got location services tracking you, 4K video rendering, constant push notifications, Bluetooth is searching, the phone gets blazing hot in your hand, the screen lags, and the battery just drains from 100% to 0 in 2 hours.
Yeah.
It's not that the phone's internal hardware is defective. The battery's just draining because of all these massive background processes you didn't even realize were open. You're just trying to send one simple text message, and the whole system freezes.
That is a brilliant mechanical analogy for what's happening in the brain. In the research, it's actually called allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear on your biological system.
Allostatic load, okay.
Yeah. When that triple threat of money, relationships, and change hits simultaneously, the allostatic load becomes too heavy. The cortisol overload actively suppresses your prefrontal cortex.
Let's define that, just so we're perfectly clear. The prefrontal cortex is basically the CEO of the brain, right?
Mhm. Yes, it sits right behind your forehead. It's responsible for logic, reason, complex problem solving, and conscious choice.
Okay.
So when cortisol floods the brain, it literally inhibits the neural pathways to the prefrontal cortex. The CEO is basically locked out of the building.
Wow.
And when your logic center is suppressed like that, your system has no choice but to fall back onto its primitive OS, its oldest, most basic survival programming.
And once we fall back to that primitive OS, we initiate this automated survival sequence that the research calls the life loop. LIFE, standing for loss or trigger, impact, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and evaluation. But the really deceptive thing about this biological loop is that when you're stuck in it, it doesn't feel like a chemical reaction. It feels like your personality.
Right, right.
It feels like, well, I guess I'm just the person who always snaps at my kids, or I'm just the person who always burns out and quits my job.
But it's not who you are. It is a biological phenomenon running on default. Let's actually walk through how this happens. The loop always enters at the victim position.
Okay.
And we need to be incredibly precise here. In this framework, being in the victim position is not a character flaw or some sign of weakness. It's an honest, accurate, first biological response to a genuine impact. You lost a job, you were betrayed by a friend, the pain is real.
You were victimized by a situation.
Exactly. But from there, the loop rapidly accelerates into the conflict position. This is the danger zone.
Right.
This is where cortisol and adrenaline are at their absolute maximum. And as we just established, your prefrontal cortex, your internal CEO, is completely offline. This is the window where you make the absolute worst decisions of your life.
Oh, man, yeah.
You lash out at your spouse, you send that explosive, career-ending email, you drink the entire bottle of wine. You do these things not because you're fundamentally a bad person, but because your neurochemical state has literally suppressed the exact mental hardware required for good decision-making.
Okay, but let me ask you this. If my brain's logic center is literally shut down, how can I even be held responsible for what I do? I'm effectively operating on autopilot, right?
Right.
What is fueling this reaction if I'm not consciously choosing it?
That's a great question. The fuel is what the research identifies as fear. And I don't mean just feeling scared. We have to look at the neuroscience of fear.
Okay.
It stands for false evidence appearing real, and it's driven by two incredibly powerful engines in the brain, memory and imagination. What's truly fascinating here is that the life loop doesn't actually require a present moment physical threat in the room with you to keep running.
Right. The threat is entirely internal. Let's break down those two engines really quick.
Yeah.
Memory is essentially the engine that presents the past as if it were happening right now.
Yeah.
It's like when you're lying in bed at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling, and your brain replays that humiliating argument you had with your boss like 3 years ago.
And this is where the biology gets incredible.
Wow.
When your hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that archives your memories,
Right, the archive.
yeah, when it pulls up that old argument, it feeds that data directly to your amygdala, which is your brain's threat detector. And the amygdala cannot tell the difference between a memory of a threat and a threat happening right now.
It just reacts.
Exactly. So it pumps out the exact same spike of cortisol as if your boss were standing at the foot of your bed yelling at you.
That is wild. And then there's the second engine, which is imagination. This is sort of the flip side, right? It presents feared futures as if they are certain facts.
Right.
It projects a disaster that hasn't even happened yet, like a future bankruptcy, or imagining your partner leaving you, and makes your body react as if you're already living through that catastrophe.
Which brings us back to your previous point. If this biological cascade is faster and more powerful than our conscious thought, aren't we just hardwired to fail? How can anyone possibly interrupt the loop when their own hormones are literally forcing them to run it?
Yes, that is the million-dollar question. If the CEO is locked out of the building, how do we stop the company from going under?
It's the paradox of the human condition, really, and it perfectly explains why insight without biological change is completely insufficient.
I mean,
Well, you can sit in therapy for a decade, you can intellectually understand exactly why your childhood makes you act a certain way, but the moment you are triggered by that boss or that spouse, your biology will still default to the most energy-efficient option.
which is the old familiar pathway of conflict.
Exactly.
So how do we actually get out of this loop?
To interrupt it, you cannot fight the cortisol flood at its peak. You just can't. You have to wait for the biological cascade to crest, and you have to reach a very specific fork in the road. This happens in the final stage of the life loop, the evaluation stage. This is the exact moment the prefrontal cortex finally flickers back online, recovering just enough from the chemical flood to make a conscious choice available to you again.
So this evaluation fork is basically the most critical juncture in the entire framework.
Yes, absolutely.
And the path splits in two completely different directions here. Let's talk about the first path, which is the one almost everyone takes by default, and that's avoidance.
Yeah, the avoidance pathway. This includes all our favorite coping mechanisms. Distracting, justifying, or just convincing ourselves everything is fine.
Right.
When we hit that fork and our logic returns, we look at the mess we just made and we instantly reach for a distraction. We throw ourselves into our work, we scroll on our phones for 5 hours, or our ego steps in and says, well, I had no choice but to yell at them. They started it.
You know, choosing avoidance makes me think of, it's like pressing snooze on a blaring fire alarm in your house.
Oh, that's perfect.
Right. Like, the immediate noise stops. You feel this wash of relief because the horrible sound is gone, but your house is still burning down. You haven't actually addressed the fire.
That analogy is scientifically spot on.
Yeah.
Avoidance feels like a resolution to the brain because it reduces the immediate discomfort. But the house is burning. The biological cost is massive because the fear fueled the memory and the imagination is left completely untouched.
The fire is still going.
Right. The loop hasn't ended. It's just pressed pause. And silently in the background, you are accumulating a massive biological debt.
So what does that debt actually look like in the body?
Two major things. First, partial GABA depletion. For those listening who might be unfamiliar, GABA is essentially your brain's natural tranquilizer. It's the chemical that hits the brakes on anxiety.
Okay, got it.
When you constantly run these avoidance loops, you deplete your reserves of GABA, making it significantly harder to calm down next time.
Oh, wow.
And second, you sensitize your amygdala. Your threat detector becomes hypersensitive, like a faulty smoke alarm that starts going off when you just make toast. The next time you get triggered, the alarm is louder and the reaction is faster.
So to actually put out the fire, we have to take the other path, the much harder path, the responsibility pathway.
Yes. And we must define this with absolute clarity. Taking responsibility does not mean taking the blame for being triggered.
Because we established you didn't choose the cortisol flood.
Exactly. Taking responsibility means owning what you do with that triggered state from the moment your prefrontal cortex comes back online.
It's directly addressing the fear, right? Like looking at the engines of memory and imagination and naming them for what they actually are.
Yes, exactly. It is a conscious, out loud acknowledgement. It is saying, this memory of my past trauma is historical. It is an archive. It is not happening to me right now.
Right.
And saying, this imagination of a catastrophic future is simply not yet real. I am reacting to a ghost.
So if we take this responsibility pathway, where does it actually lead us? The ultimate goal, according to all this research, is something called reconciliation. But this was a massive paradigm shift for me when reading the sources, because reconciliation is fundamentally misunderstood in our culture.
Yeah.
It is not performative forgiveness.
It absolutely is not. True reconciliation is not saying that the terrible thing that happened to you was somehow acceptable. It's not forcing you to hug someone who hurt you, and it certainly isn't erasing your legitimate anger.
Then what is it? Because we throw that word around a lot.
Reconciliation is the biological return to the present moment. It is the recovery of now from the grip of memory and imagination. When you name your fear, when you separate the past and the future from your present environment, your biology actively changes.
How so? Like physically?
Yes, physically. The cortisol levels literally drop, and your brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, actually rises.
BDNF.
Right? Think of BDNS as fertilizer for your brain. It's the protein that helps grow new, healthy neural connections, which is a process called neuroplasticity. Oh, awesome.
By returning to the present moment, your internal threat template gets updated. You are quite literally forcing your nervous system to upgrade from the primitive OS to the upgraded OS.
You are recovering the now. That is incredibly powerful. But honestly, it also sounds a bit exhausting to do all the time. I appreciate that the research introduces this very realistic concept called the life wobble.
Oh, the life wobble is so important.
Because let's be real, we are all going to fall back into our old loops. Our brains have a negative survival bias, right? We're literally wired to look for the negative as a survival mechanism.
Yeah, the life wobble theory is crucial because it completely removes the shame of getting triggered. Everyone wobbles. Everyone falls below that line of conscious choice sometimes.
Right.
The goal of mental fitness is not to achieve some state of Zen perfection where you never feel anger or panic. That's impossible. The goal is simply to notice the wobble sooner. It's about shortening the backswing of the pendulum, catching yourself in the evaluation stage, and consciously returning to the center. Okay, I hear you, but let's make this highly practical for the listener. I want to push back on the reality of doing this in daily life.
Sure.
When my boss sends me a vague message at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday that just says, "We need to talk on Monday," and my chest immediately tightens, and I can feel the panic flooding my system. I am not calmly thinking about my neural pathways or my BDNF levels.
No, of course not.
I'm just spiraling. So what are the actual practical steps I can take in that exact moment?
The framework provides a very clear 4-step process for that exact scenario.
Yeah.
Stop, connect, regulate, and manage.
Okay, stop, connect, regulate, manage.
Right. Step 1. When you feel that physiological shift, the tight chest, the racing pulse you have, to stop. You do not reply to the message. You do not speak. You freeze the external action.
Okay.
Step 2, connect. You ask yourself a vital internal question. What is this physical signal trying to tell me? You consciously try to connect the body sensation, like the tight chest, to the emotion, fear, and then the emotion to the underlying trigger.
Wait, there's a huge caveat there for the connect stage in the sources, isn't there? Biologically speaking, your brain will not open up to explore that emotional pain if it still feels like it's under active attack.
Right.
Like you can't force a connection if you're hyperventilating.
That is a brilliant observation, yeah. Biological connection depends heavily on something called vagal tone. Your vagus nerve is essentially the superhighway communicating between your gut, your heart, and your brain.
Okay.
High vagal tone means you can hit the brakes on your stress response quickly. If you try to force deep emotional processing before your nervous system feels physically safe, it can actually be re-traumatizing. So you have to regulate first.
And this is where things like breath work or, going for a walk actually serve a mechanical purpose, right? It's not just woo-woo relaxation.
Exactly. It's purely mechanical. When you engage in deep, slow breath work, you are physically stimulating the vagus nerve. You are sending a mechanical signal from your diaphragm up to your brain that says, we are safe. And that lowers the cortisol enough that your prefrontal cortex, the CEO, can actually unlock the door and get back to work.
And once the CEO is back at the desk, we move to the final step. Manage.
And manage is not about willpower. It is not white-knuckling your way through a panic attack. Manage is the gradual neurological process of carving new neural pathways through repeated conscious choice.
Right.
Every single time you run the loop, catch the wobble, and choose responsibility over avoidance, you make a tiny physical deposit of neuroplastic change in your brain. Eventually, with enough repetition, that new, healthier pathway becomes your automatic default.
Okay, let's bring this all together because this has been a profound journey through our own biology today. What we've really uncovered here is that you, and yes, I am talking directly to you listening right now, you are not broken. You are not defective.
Not at all.
You're simply carrying the heavy, unmanaged, allostatic load of life's stress. The pressures of money, the complexities of relationships, and the overwhelming pace of change have just been crashing your system. But instead of letting fear, driven by the ghosts of past memories and the shadows of imagined futures, trap you in an endless, toxic life loop of avoidance and conflict, well, you now know you have the power to choose.
You do.
You can wait for the CEO to return. You can pause at that evaluation fork. You can take responsibility for your triggered state, and you can biologically return to the present moment. You can achieve genuine reconciliation with the now.
It's life-changing.
So the next time that internal fire alarm goes off, don't just hit snooze and let the house burn down. Stop. Regulate your nervous system. And remember, you are the most important person in your life. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.